Alright, welcome everybody to a new video, and today we are going to celebrate the release of Stitches version 1. It's finally here, out of beta. We're all good, and I am going to use this video as an introduction for anyone that wouldn't be aware of what Stitches does, what kind of problem it solves, and how to use it in a very general sense. So, first of all, what is Stitches? That's a question really important to answer. And if we use the documentation that you can find on stitches.dev, you'll see that Stitches is a lightweight performance styling library with a focus on component architecture and developer experience. What does that mean? It means, first of all, that this is a styling library akin to what you could find in like style component, emotion, and other library that are aimed to actually manifest your design and help you just like build a CSS to manifest your design in your application, side project, website, or whatever. Basically, those are libraries that help you build your project visually. One of the key ingredient with Stitches is like it's a very small runtime. It's basically near zero runtime, as you can see in the quotation again. What it means is rather than do everything in JavaScript, Stitches is leveraging like a lot of standard web technologies like CSS custom properties and let like your browser do the heavy lifting in terms of like switching of themes, cascading in your CSS, rather than just like calculate everything in JavaScript, which makes Stitches very, very fast, very, very light, and also in the end, very, very easy to use across different framework, across no framework at all, just like if you want to use plain old JavaScript and just like export your CSS, you can do as well. So it's very, very convenient, and still have like a little bit of JavaScript to give you like all of the convenience that you would lose if you were doing CSS modules, for instance, where you have to write all of the CSS yourself. So this is a trade-off, and if it's a trade-off that might be interesting for you, Stitches is like a very good candidate. It is based on the concept of variant, so we'll see a little bit later during this introduction what it means, but basically it's just saying, rather than be a declarative component library where you just say, okay, my text have all of those properties and I have like a little bit of props to decide what kind of properties or values for those properties are enabled, you would have different variants. So for instance, your text could have size, color, animations, and you'll be able to switch those on the fly, or you can even have like your variants be semantic. So you could say what is the role of your text would be like, one would be title, and you have like all the properties linked to that title, and still have another variant for the color, for instance. So we'll see later on what it means, and you'll have to wrap your head around that idea of variance. It's like a very, it is the statement of Stitches, and once you start using that variant pattern, everything makes sense, and it's really difficult to actually go back to a regular, quote-unquote, styling library. So another big focus of Stitches is actually the developer experience. You see it's like on the front page. And basically it's like this idea of having like a lot of small quality of life built within the library, and like the authors of that library actually looking forward to actually improve the developer experience for everyone using Stitches. And this translates into many different small things. So we'll get over some of them, and yeah. So we are going to set up a project using stitches. In my case, it is going to be, for this introduction, it's going to be like a React based on top of the Next.js framework. And the reason for this is like it's a very broad use case, and it's going to be able to show you a bunch of different things that stitches can do. Remember that this is like a very, this is one use case. So you can use stitches without any framework. You can use stitches outside of React. There's like a million ways you can use stitches. I'm just going to like show you one use case, which I think is going to be what most people would use it to. Yeah, so what I have here is a very basic project. It is like a Next.js project. I didn't really change anything. I just added the strict version of it and the base URL to be able to absolutely import my stuff. I'm going to use TypeScript. If you're not really interested in TypeScript, just ignore the part where there is TypeScript. But if you are, you'll see Stitches is actually built to be really compatible, or I would say just like very easy to complete with TypeScript, and it plays very nicely with it. And this is actually a very big deal if you have like TypeScript projects. So the first thing you'll have to do is, of course, install Stitches, right? You'll have to just go in, and here, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to use npm. So really simple. You go in and you add Stitches React. And while this is installing, if you were to not use Stitches with React, you can use Stitches core, and we'll see later on maybe a little bit of what kind of pattern you have. All right, so we're installed. It's all good. And now what you can do is you could be using installed from, there we go. And you can use this as you will be using like style component, for instance. So you would say, for instance, title is equal to styled h1, and then you can go in and say color blue. There you go. And as you can see, the way to write it is to use like the JavaScript notation. So it's really strange when you start using it, but honestly, you get used to it very quickly. And oh yeah, I need to start. I need to actually run the server. Trust me, I am a professional. Everything is good. And there you go. You can style your stuff. So here you go. It's red, it's blue and stuff. So you can use it this way. I'm not going to go too deep in it because I think this is like a very narrow use case and you shouldn't really be using it this way. So we're going to do it the right way. And now that we're configured, we can jump into the configuration. So the configuration is a very small step that lets you like define all of your themes, all of the different custom properties, your media queries and everything like this into a central location. So we're going back here and we are going to create a new file, which is going to be, for instance, UI stitchesconfig.ts. All right, and now we can create, and I'll let you know exactly how those things work. So one of the good things about having like TypeScript autocomplete everything is you have like the autocomplete for basically all of the stuff. If you don't know exactly what's gonna what you need to do, you have access to everything that you have. So for instance here, there we go, and we are going to use create stitches, and there's going to be nothing in it. And you know what? We're going to export all of this here. So if you were to do this, we can now use, yeah, and I need to, of course, do my stuff correctly. We can use now style not coming from Stitches React, but you can use it from the UI Stitches config, and everything works the same. It's all good, but now we have access to this configuration, and within that configuration, we'll be able to define a bunch of different things. So if we were to go in, control space, you have a list of what's that create stitches is expecting. And one of them is the theme. So if we were to go in, theme, control space, and you have like a bunch of different properties you can define. So we're going to be interested in colors for now. And here we go. And now I can define like all of the tokens that I'm going to use within my application. So let's call it accent color. Let's go for the Canadian way, representing the Canadians. And let's say here we go for blue. Doesn't change anything except now within anything that uses colors. So for instance, color itself, border color, what else? I don't know, background and stuff like this. I can start now to use accent color. And if I use this, you'll see it becomes blue. And there we go. That's how you would have defining your tokens. Like if you want to have like a color scale, if you want to have like a font size scale, a padding scale, and all of those things, you define everything within your Stitches config, within the theme. And let's go for font sizes, for instance. And we go in and say, so I'm going to use stuff that people don't like too much, but that's fine. This one is going to be, I don't know. Don't use that. Don't use that, but that's fine. And here we go, font size. And now it's available to me as 100. And if I were to change this later on and say 100 is this much, then you will just like it will change and update all of the one that uses that specific token. And what's really interesting is if you look at how the token itself is made and used. Let me zoom. There you go. You have here actually, and you see it uses CSS custom properties. And what's really interesting with it is Stitches is not doing any switching. If you were to override this with like a different theme or whatever, it would just go in and change the actual CSS custom property. So no heavy JavaScript going over each object that have this specific thing and going over and trying to remap everything. It also means that if you were to have like 1 million of those, changing that specific value is just one operation rather than just like 1 million operation. So it's really convenient, and it's really good in terms of compatibility. I can use this custom property everywhere in my code. I can use it without Stitches. I can just like erase, replace, override it in pure CSS if I want to. I can use styling, I don't know, graph styling library that don't have a way to define colors, and I can just like jam in my CSS custom properties into it, and everything's gonna work great. So going back here, we are going to move to actually, I think like the big point of Stitches, which is the concept of variance. And if there's one thing you need to remember, is it's all about the variance, always, ever, all the time. So for instance, rather than have our title be defined here, because that pattern, for instance, would push me to define my component on every pages or every component or whatever. But let's say I want to have like a very standard text.ts that will export like everything text related. So here you go. I come in, I import my style from UI stitches config. I export my const text. And let's say this one is a paragraph, or even like a span, let's say. And we are going to define like a bunch of different things, accent color, if I know how to write, and font sizes. So we're going to do exactly the same as what we had. And now here we go in, we erase that. We import this from UI text, probably need to save text. All right. So it's all good. Now that introduction to stitches is a span. It has like all of the same information that I had before. But now what we can do is actually define variants. And the variants, the concept is really simple. You go in and you say, for instance, color. Let's say we're still Canadian. No, let's say we move to the US way of writing. Blue, and this means this is now blue. We also have red, which means the color is red. There we go. And this means that if we were to now use it, I can come into the component I'm importing, and I control space again, and you see color is now available, and I have the choice between blue, red, or nothing. But let's say I'm go for red. Now you can see like my stitches, introduction to stitches, switch to red. And what's happening is basically you have all of your base style being applied. And if I were to inspect this, and let me show you here, you see that all of my base style are applied. And then on top of those, you have all the styles from the variants. So overriding with red. So when you think of this, at first you're just like, okay, what's the point? I can just do exactly the same by having like a prop that just like toggle the property. But it becomes really interesting when rather than just have one property being changed, you actually change a bunch of different things. So for instance, let's say when you say your stuff is blue, you would want the background to be aqua. You would want maybe, let's say everywhere we want it to be black for now. It's just like a quick and dirty thing. And red, you would say that the background color is now, I don't know, orange. So you can start to see that you can do a bunch of different things within your variant. And you can say, for instance, a button has now, rather than a color, it has like a role, or just like not a role, because it would match, it would collide against like all of the area attributes. But you can say like, what's the type of a button? You can just like define the button as like a primary button, a secondary button, and you can just like add like a bunch of different styles. And now when it becomes really interesting is when you have multiple variants. So let's say we can say, for instance, we have like the disabled title for some reason. Rather than have like a blue disable, then a blue enable, then a red disable, then a red disable, and a red enable, you can have disabled true or false kind of. And you are going to use all of those variants in unison and have like exactly the display you want to. So in that case, let's say when it's disabled, the color is gray. And what happens, and we'll see what happens here, is if I use disable here, you'll see my color being gray, but I still have my background for some reason. And maybe those variants, they change different things. So let's say for some reason I would want my cursor to be pointer here, and here we would say the cursor to be where is it? Not allowed. Doesn't really make sense in that case, but it's just like showing you what you can do. So here you go and you see my cursor is not allowed. I have a big unable to do, but if I were to change my disable here, it would be just like a cursor. All right. So all of this is good. And when you have like a single text for all of your website, for instance, all of your project, you can see like bundling a bunch of different variants together is going to just like reduce the amount of complexity within your style. You just have now maybe a size variant, a color variant, an animation, whatever you would like to. You can now build separate concern and just say, okay, those are different things, and you can use them in conjunction with each other. In that specific case, you'll see that my color and my disable actually have a colliding property. So which one is going to use? It's going to use the one that's defined the latest. And maybe sometimes it's not exactly what you want, right? Maybe sometimes you would be like, I wish I could manage those collision. And that's exactly what, there we go, is compound variant. And compound variant is actually very simple to use. It's an array of compounding variants. So if you go in again and you control space, you'll see that you have access to color. And you can say when the variance is blue and disable is true, I would like the CSS to be, and maybe we can find something like a blue, I don't know, a medium blue. Let's go. Which means that now if we were to use blue, here my color, and I'm going to show you for sure, is medium blue. So you can see I have my disable state here, I have my color blue here, and I have the compound variant that actually makes sure everything is good. And this is really useful when you have all of those colliding properties, which means now you can have, like, for instance, if for instance you have here another, maybe that would be a better actually variant, is if you have like a gradient, you could be saying, I don't really want to define a gradient for each of those colors. So you could have like a gradient, the colors themselves, and have compound variants that actually collide and make sure those gradients are correct. And actually we can just go and do something like this. Let's say edit on the background, background color, and I'm just gonna grab, and you can see how I use those. Sorry, I wasn't showing. Let's say background gradient CSS, and we're just gonna grab a very nice gradient, for instance, here. That's absolutely perfect. There we go. We're going here. Linear gradient. There we go. All right. And let's go here and say this one is a gradient. And do I know how to do gradients? Actually, maybe I don't. It's a background image. All right. So we are here, everything is good, except maybe we want to just, like, as I said, merge those gradients together with actually the color. And this is where we can use a bunch of different ways, and I'm going to show you 2 ways. One of them is just to say we're going to use a compound variant. So when this happens, we come in and say it's coming from blue to cyan, for instance. And there you go, blue to cyan. And then I would go in and have the same for red. So when this is red, I would have red to orange. And when it's not defined, I would have something from black to gray. And now I can use this with no colors. You can see here it's black to gray. By default, maybe I don't want my accent color to be blue, but let's call it yellow. So my accent color is yellow. So if I don't do anything, it's going to take that color. But maybe I want to now go in and say, oh, but I would like this to be actually blue. So I have my color, it is blue. There you go. And the gradient changes with it. And the same goes for red. The gradient changes with it. And you don't have to maintain like a bunch of logic that comes in and say, if color this, if gradient this, and you have like all of those ternary nesting into each in the properties of your CSS, making your CSS actually very hard to read, especially if you have a theme that gets involved and everything. Now, there is another way you can do this, and this is to use actually locally scoped token. So we saw tokens here, the accent color and the font size. You absolutely can use locally scoped token, and this is used with the double $sign. And I would say, for instance, top gradient, and we'd come in and say top gradient in the very, very regular case is black. We're gonna say the bottom gradient is in that case gray. And here I'll just use my top gradient, my bottom gradient, and everything works just the same. I'm going to remove my compound variable because we're going to see that we're not going to use this. And here we're back to not really working. You see it's black to gray, and this is not really doing much. But what we can do is we can actually define overrides into each prettier is not configured. There we go. There we go. Making it beautiful. We can define whatever we want in here. So we go back to blue and cyan. And here we go back to red and orange. And the way it works is now if I go back to the CSS inspector, is you can see our color red actually now define custom CSS property. Once again, leveraging like the default browser behaviors. So you can see here red and orange, and the gradient itself is actually using those CSS properties. So we don't have to worry too much about those compounding variants, but having those resolution is actually a very good thing. So when you have like 10, 20 variants, sometimes you have some conflicts, and having a way to actually resolve them is actually super useful. All right, so all of this, that's great. This is on the part of you writing a proper text component, but now sometimes not everything goes to plan and you need the CSS prop or a good way to override pretty much anything. So when we say using the CSS prop, it's basically having the equivalent of, if you're using React, the style prop, where you can actually define inline styles. You get pretty much the same thing, except you have all of your tokens. So let's say we have the exact same equivalent. We can use the CSS, and you see here CSS gives me the CSS, and I have like access to my tokens, so the accent color, the font size, and everything. So if I go here, I can now say that the color is actually white. And you see now it overrides everything. This one is just like the inline styles. It just says, goes and do this on top of whatever you did before. There's no conflict because this is the one that applies. Also means that here, if we were to add a token that would be high contrast, for instance, and we say that this one is F0, 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 in here, I can go back and use high contrast. And you see me using control space again. Oh, and actually it doesn't show much because it's on the side. Let me just like reframe this here. Yes, so if I go here and I use control space again, you'll see I get the autocomplete with like pretty much all of the colors from CSS HTML spec, but also have like all of my tokens I defined before. And this is where the developer experience is really nice, is this idea that you can just like have everything really up for grab, and everything is really thought for you as a developer to have a way to define your text component, but also have like an override and be able to not have to put everything on the text component itself. All right, so all of this is really great, but for some reason you might say this is just like a string. This is just a string, and if for some reason I come in and say I contrasted, I would lose that link, right? And nothing is actually telling me that I lost that link. So it makes like refactor a little bit more difficult because you don't really know what's using what. Don't worry, everything is thought of on Stitches. And if it's not, you can just go into the Discord channels and ask a question, and some changes can be made if your argument is actually solid. But now let's say we have style here. I can just import the theme. I don't need styled anymore here, but I can come back here and use the theme, colors, and I'll have access to my high contrasted, meaning on the day that I change this back to high contrast, this will actually break here, and you'll have like a build fail if you're using TypeScript. You'll get like this doesn't exist if you're not. All right, so we'll go back to high contrast and we are good to go. Now, one of the things that makes usually using styling libraries a little bit harder is all of responsive and media queries and all that is related to the concept of working with different sizes, different clients. So some of them will use dark mode. Some client will want reduced motion. Some are going to be on mobiles. Some are going to be on super large desktop and everything. And yet again, Stitches has pretty much everything that you need. And the way you do all of this is through, here again, control space, give me the media. And when you go to the media, we can go here, sorry, I'm gonna remove this. You have access to everything that you want. So for instance, you would say tablets, and the tablets is going to be at media, and in my case it's going to be a min width of I don't know, 720 pixel, and a desktop is going to be anything that is over 1 to 1280, sorry. I don't know, I'm pulling those numbers straight up out of my ass. So if you have like your numbers, use those. But now you have access to those media queries. And what it does is you can come pretty much everywhere within your, whether they are variants, whether they are the base styles, and you can come in and use at desktop. And now you have access to everything media query related to that media query for desktops. So in that case, let's say the font size is now 10 rem. If I go here and, all right, we're back. We are back. So yeah, just for the just for the explanation, I was missing those pixel. Okay, let's go. Sorry. I'll get there. Here we go. So now that when you have more than 1280 pixel, you get to have a big font, and when you go back lower, it actually reduces. So you have those, but it's not just those. So if you were to go in and rather than here use your desktop, which you can also do a bunch of different things, like color is gonna be true when you are initial, so no things are set. You can say everything is blue, but once you reach the tablet mode, I would like everything to be red. And here you can see, going back here, we're now blue, but when you expand, it becomes red. So you can see why this becomes really interesting when you have like sizing and you have like different padding, different things like this. This can become really useful. Let's go back here. This is also really useful if you have like a reduced motion, let's say, and you would want to have like some transition. You can actually disable a bunch of different transition in the case of a user wanting to have reduced motion within the website, within his configs on the browser. All right, so this is great. Now we're going to touch a different concept, and we're going to go back to Stitches config. Is the idea of creating custom CSS properties. So if you were to go here and we just go in and you say here, once again, control space, it gives you pretty much everything that you need, and you have the utils. And the way the utils work is you basically pass, you create your, so let's call it margin X. you pass a function, and that function is going to do a bunch of different things. So in the case of margin X, maybe we want to say margin left is equal to, and here we're going to call it value. Here we go in value. And this is actually returning that. And margin right is equal to the same value. Now you see that this has implicitly a type any. For now, we're just going to leave it this way. And this means that we can go in and use this newly custom margin X. And I can say this is 5 rems, for instance. And if I do this, you'll see that it actually adds the margin on the left and the right. This means you can put everything that you want in those custom CSS properties. So if you want to have something like gap, but you want to actually test if there's support for grids and do all of crazy things, you can do a bunch of different logic here and basically polyfill the stuff you need. You can do utility function, like actually if you want to center a text, you can have like a center property that will actually display this as a grid or like a flex and do a bunch of different things. And this is really useful. Now you can see that that value is actually not typed at the moment, meaning this can take anything. So if I were to pass blue here, nothing is going to complain, but of course it is not going to work. So if I were to inspect this, it actually doesn't do anything. Yeah, because this is not even a correct thing. Yeah, that's correct. So maybe you want to actually define how this is working. So in that case, we are going to import something else, and you can see once again control space. If I were to not really know something, I would just say, hey, give me a scale value, and here we're gonna just say this is a scale value, and that scale value is going to be of the property margin left. Yes. So now it comes in and say, hey, by the way, I'm hoping you would be giving me either a string. Am I missing something? Sorry. Background margin left. No, that's correct. Oh, maybe it's just expecting like 50 or something. What? Scale of margin left. Number is not assignable. Yes, that's exactly. String is not assignable. What? What are you not? Oh, sorry. I'm 100% mistaken. Scale value, of course, needs to be. This is when you defined. So in my case, let's say here I define the font size. I can actually now use all of the values that are within that specific theme scale. So this one here would be space. And maybe we want to have something like, I don't know, large, doesn't really matter, 5 rem, and actually this would be here from the scale. So any values from that specific scale. So if I go here, I can complete and give me the large value. Sorry, I actually owned myself. So we're gonna go for margin Y. And now this is not a scale value. Now this is a property value. This is the one I wanted to show first, but let's just change in and out. And let's say this one is margin top and this one is margin bottom. Now, if I want to use this one, I can come in and say margin Y, this is equal to the same large, because this is part of the margin top, margin left, and maybe I would, for the sake of being consistent, the margin top used that specific scale of the space scale, but now I can also come in and say for rem, and I can define any property here that would be allowed in margin top. So this is very convenient. You can also define, of course, your own types if you want to just like restrict to very specific values, if you want to do some crazy things on top of it. This is actually very, very interesting. So all of this is good. We can, of course, do everything that is related to animations and all of those things like this. We can do everything that is related to class selectors. So if you want to have like descendant combines, if you want to have, let's go for this. Let's say you want to have like, I don't know, something that comes before this, and you say that it is content test. You'll see it just pops in right there. You can do pretty much everything that you can do in CSS. I'll let you look at the documentation for this. Everything is really well explained, and it's all good here. You can do everything that you want. You can also, yet again, look at everything that that function exports, and you see that it does export two different things like global CSS and keyframes. So keyframes, for instance, we're going to use this that keyframe and say keyframe let's call this rotate. All right, and now this start at 0%, and this is going to be a transform, and this is going to be I don't know, it's rotate, no, rotate, and is it Z, Y, X? I don't know, but let's say 0, and this needs to be a string. And now for 100%, we're gonna say 360 degree. There we go, and come in here. Let's say we have a variant. Let's say that's rotate true in the case of that, and we say transform. Rotate is here again, 0 degree. And of course, I'm 100% sure I am not using it correctly, but that's fine. And here we're gonna say this is using the rotate, and this is going to be 50 milliseconds. This is here importing rotate from stitches, except I uppercased it. And here, this needs to be here. UI stitches, I need to export that. Here we go, rotate. And now if I made something good, I can just come in and say this is rotating. And of course, this is not correct because I missed something. Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. And let's say it takes actually 2 seconds to actually rotate. And this is going to be infinite. There you go. So you can do like all of your animation. You can do all of those things that you need to do. It's all good and fun. Everything is great. Now let me remove this because this is obviously not something you would want right there. But it is very possible, and you can pretty much do everything you can do in CSS. You can do it right here. Now, something that you might want or not do is actually, if you remember, we actually defined that text to be a span. But for some reason, maybe you want it to be something else. And you can just come in and say what kind of other elements this is going to be. And if I were to inspect this now, and going back here, you'll see that this is an H1 now. So if you want to have like semantic information, you can actually define in your code what everything is. This is very, very useful. You don't necessarily, and maybe I'm just gonna remove pretty much everything that's here, because we don't really need all of this. It might be easy to just like come in and define everything using as, but there are other ways you can do it. So as, let's go, we're gonna use as H1 in that case. But there are other ways you can do this. So for instance, this is good when it's a one-off, but you might want to actually say that you have a page title, and this is the only one that actually is going to have access to the H1 tag. And here, really simple, you come in and you say this takes the text. And here, rather than importing text, you would import the page title, use the page title, and now you don't need that as anymore. There we go. I need to save it. There we go. And here, if I do inspect it again, you'll see that this is an H1 again. And this is, to me, way clearer exactly what that specific component is. And it also means that you can now define a bunch of different things. So let's say you are here and you say that the text, and something that I didn't mention before is you could say that every page title can have default variants, and this one is going to be color blue, and maybe the gradient is true. What did I miss? Gradient is true. Oh yeah, and the gradient is here, sorry. You can also come in and define other things like the color. This one is actually a high contrast. There we go. And why you not here? Why you not here? Maybe we found a first bug in version 1. Color blue. Oh yeah, no, it's because of course I'm actually defining the variant here for the color, so of course it's not gonna work. All right, anyway, so you can have like all of your default variants and you can define and pick from everything. So you can have like a very broad text component or base component with like all of the style, all of the different ways you can display text with all of the different font sizes, all of the different colors and everything, and just then come in and use kind of like a re-export and just say now you have access to the page title, and that page title has access to all of the variants and all of the CSS overriding things that you have in your text. So you can come in and say my color is high contrast here. So you can just like override everything that you need. But now the page title by default has all of the styles and all of the variants that you would like to have. All right. So there's one more thing that's really useful. And this is the fact that if I go to stitches and I look at what I can export, it also has a CSS function. And if you look at the CSS function, it pretty much does the same thing as styled. So it's going to build a class, it's going to build all of the variants, it's 100% compatible. So if I go here and I use CSS, this is going to work just the same, except you'll see that page title now is not available. This is not a component anymore. This is now a function. So if I were to want to use all of the same thing, you will have to define the class names, and now page title is a function, and you'll see that I have access to pretty much everything that I would need to have in that case. So for instance, I can come in and say the color is going to be blue. What's happening? Oh, I need to save. Yeah, there you go. I need to save, of course. All right, OBS crashed, but we're back. So yes, I was saying when, so this is really useful if you are in a situation where you need to actually pass class names rather than just like have components. This is also really good because now you can use anything semantic. So if you want to actually drive your HTML, like in GSX, but you want to have like HTML to be more visually explicit about what you want. You can do this just right there and say that this is a gradient, and the gradient is true, for instance. And here we go. Or in the case of you want to actually make it not a gradient, there you go. You go for not undefined but false, and you can do everything that you need to do using that CSS function. So there is one last thing that I really wanted to show you, is this idea of global styles. So if you go here and you go once again into what that function exports, you'll see there is a bunch of different things. So create themes, all of those we're going to see later on. But one that's really interesting is the global CSS. And the global CSS is pretty much CSS that applies to every pages, everywhere, and is basically called on mount of your application. And let's say that we want to do this, and I want to actually export. I'm gonna call it global, and this is a global CSS, and now export const. Yes. I can do pretty much everything that I want. So if I were to look for body, for instance, and I say that margin is equal to 0, this is going to be called everywhere. Now you need to this is kind of loading the gun, and now you need to fire the gun. And in next world, all of this would happen in an app.ts. So if I go here and I go here and I say underscore app.tsx, I'll have to build this. So I do have one here. I'm going to remove everything that we don't need. There we go. I don't need all of those. This is just fine. Actually, I would need this. Yes, I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need this. All right. So if I were to have this, this would be pretty much a no operation in that case, because nothing changed. But now I can import global from UI stitches, and if I were to actually fire that global here, this would be set. So let's say the background color is accent color. There you go. I do have like a CSS that applies to pretty much like the root of my that anything that is set in the body. Here I can define that all the H1s have a position relative, and maybe this is even something that I want to say. By the way, everything in the world does have position relative. Everything has a box sizing of border box, and all of those kind of things. And if I were to actually inspect, there we go. Here, if I go to the top right, you'll see here that this is a role that is now available for star. So every element on everywhere. So, okay, so we are pretty deep into the demonstration now. And I really want to just have like one last small discussion, small exposition about like that idea of patterns. And you'll see this, that I'm using like a bunch of different ways to do the same things. Just like the gradients with like locally scoped tokens or compound variants. And this is one of the big pros to me of stitches. It's pretty much like a hands-off library. You can do a bunch of things on a bunch of different ways. And this is true for many different part of that library. It doesn't enforce a very strong, it doesn't have very strong intent in the sense of you need to do something a very specific way. It doesn't even provide default for colors. It doesn't even provide default for sizing and all the things. It's all up to you. So we'll see in next videos the kind of pattern that you can use and why they are good, why they're bad, and which one you would want to use in which circumstances. But for instance, let's say we want to go in and rather than have those accent color, high contrast or whatever, we would have semantic tokens versus weighted token versus auto-defined token and stuff like this. So none of those answers are wrong. None are good. It really depends on the preferences you have, and they all have trade-offs. So for instance, for font sizes, you can really go for like the 100, 200, and let's say we're going 300, 400, 500, and so on and so on. And maybe this one is like 0.65. This one is 1 rem. This one is 125. This one is 135. I'm pulling those numbers straight up out of my ass, so really don't use those. But you have a case of making this like all of your scales. So now if you were to use those, maybe in the space, it would not be exactly the same, but it would be like, maybe this one would be 1, and let's say we add 1 to everything. Let's say we add 1 to everything for some reason in the space scale. And you see here, hey, by the way, you can't use large anymore because large doesn't exist. Really useful. There we go. So you have those, like the weight that you have, just like the font weight. And it's something that a lot of designers use. It makes it really easy to convey what is standard, and of course you would continue behind like 500, you would go like up to 900 or whatever, and you know exactly what is like the default, the normal, what is bigger regardless of what all of this is, but you can definitely do exactly the same now with like extra small, small, normal, large, extra large. This is really like up to you to define what kind of tokens you want to use. The same goes for colors. So for instance, sometimes people would use red 1, red 2, red 3, red 4, red 5, and so on, just like to define like the amount of redness of that specific token. And this is fine. You could also have tokens which are accent color, and you define the things, high contrast, and you define the things. You can also have red 12, for instance, be red. And now if you want to use this, you come in and say, this is red 12. And so this is like something you might want to actually use. And you see here, I use the accent color, and now everything is becoming red. So there are like a million different ways you can achieve like the same things. And some are better depending on the situation that you are in, the context that you want to develop your, either it's like a design system or just like a very small application, and you have like styles for everything. For instance, the accent color here is really useful when you go in and now you have red 12, but you also have yellow 12. You can switch in between red and yellow very easily. You don't have to go into every places you use red 12 and either replace red 12 by yellow. So now your red 12 custom CSS custom variable is actually yellow and it is confusing, or you have to replace everywhere red 12 with yellow 12 and stuff like this. So there are trade-offs, and this is something I really want to explore in future video, and maybe with like collaboration with other developers to see what kind of pattern they use and why they use something in particular. Yeah, just like go use different patterns, see the one that works for you, and actually use those. So for me, for instance, for font sizes, the pattern that I've seen work very, very well is this idea of having -2, -1, and then all the other one are +0, then I have a +1, and then I have +2. And this is really, I've seen it to be really useful in terms of everything that is size scale. It's really useful to say +0 is like your normal, and then you have like bigger, even bigger, and you can scale this up to as much as you want. And this has been really useful for me. I've also worked with those and those, so it really depends on collaborating with other developers. If it's only you, then you can use the pattern you prefer. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now in the next videos, we are going to actually explore other use cases. So one of them is to actually not use any of that configuration that we had with like the theme, the utils and everything, and just using the library. If you just want to do like styling of a few titles and you want to use it like a style component or whatever, this is just fine and you can use it this way. So we're gonna have that specific use case. In that same vein, we have like we're gonna have another video on how to use stitches outside of React. So if you want to use Vue, for instance, if you want to use no framework and you want to just pump this into a JavaScript file and use like a plain HTML with like a custom JavaScript, this works also good. We're gonna see another video like having different themes. So let's say you want to have like light mode and dark mode. There's many ways you can achieve this, and they have like trade-off. Each of them have trade-offs. But there's also like the idea of like having a toggle where you can say make everything slightly bigger, because now it's used like on iPads and people that have like fat fingers or whatever. This is like a use case that we actually use in production. There's also have like a very specific focus on what happens when you server-side render, because all of this that we saw actually runs on the client side. And if you want to server-side render a bunch of stuff, there's a few things you need to consider. It's not too much because Stitches as a whole is designed to be working in a server-side rendered world, but there's a few configurations that you need to do. And this actually compounds with like the idea of like dark mode and stuff like this, so you don't have like flickers and all the things. We're gonna also do like another use cases if you want to use I don't want to say helper, but just like already predefined colors. So as I said before, there is no default scale for the font sizes. There's no scale like the color scales and everything. But there are some tools that will actually provide you with those scales. So you don't have to invent everything. You see, I use like red, yellow, and blue and whatever, but you might want to have like actual colors that make sense. And this is like, we're going to use like the radix color, which is made by the same authors as Stitches. It's just like a different package, but they just like play nicely together. We're going to also have like a use case when you want to use radix UI component, which is in the same case like a radio button, a pop-up that is really accessible, good for mobiles and keyboard navigation and stuff like this. And you can use like Stitches and the radix component and just like make them work well together. And we are also going to have, of course, like the whole goal of Stitches is to facilitate the concept of creating a design system, like a full-blown design system. So yeah, we're gonna have like a few discussion about like creating a design system as a whole, and how Stitches is actually a very good tool for this in performance, in like the different way you can create the components and what kind of pattern you want to use. And this one is going to be like a larger discussion. Maybe it's going to be a series on all by itself. But yeah, hopefully this introduction is like showing you like the very different ways you can use Stitches, what it does, how it does stuff. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you have very specific questions. I'll be happy to answer, have follow-up videos to actually make sure I can actually show you like in very different use cases how Stitches is actually great. Sometimes Stitches is going to be a bad choice, but I think having used this for about like a few months now, it actually adapts very well to a lot of different situations. And And now that it's version 1 out of beta, it's actually good to go for production and stuff like this. We've been using it in production for a very long time now, but we can expect V1 to be like no breaking changes moving forward, just like bug fixes if there are any. So far there aren't. I'm just stupid sometimes and actually miswrite stuff. So yeah. Hopefully you had you learned something, and let me know in the comment if there is something I'm missing, and I'll make sure to include this in the next videos. All right. Have a good one, and see you later, and maybe see you in the modules Discord and stuff if you want to ask questions and stuff like this. All right. Have fun. Cheers.